Thanks ever so much for that, Maggie. The reason I'm doing this is twofold, really. One is I think sometimes when we hear something that we've heard or read 1,000 times before, probably, then it can get very, very familiar. And it's interesting that the way that the Bible speaks to us is that each time we read it, something else will come to us. And the second is that what a preacher thinks he's preaching is not always what's actually being heard. So I thought we'd find out what you thought. From either of those this morning, then, from the Gospel, which is the more common and regular one, or from the Epistle to the Hebrews, was there anything that struck anybody in a different way this morning, or really stood out, or anything they really like?
Thanks, Ian. It was the juxtaposition of the two readings, and I have to say that I'm familiar with the second reading in particular, but not of the full response from the leader, where he goes on and says, yes, there is only one God, but he also then talks a bit about the lack of relevance of the kind of offerings that they were making. And I kind of think, because I'd often wondered, why was it that Jesus had actually spotted that he was close to the kingdom of heaven? And he'd clearly understood that bit, which, of course, it gets picked up in Hebrews.
Thank you. Anybody else? I mean, that you've saved some time there, because I can take that paragraph out of my sermon now. Okay? There we go. Anybody else?
I just want to say it's very
Hang on.
how appropriate in these times of loving our neighbours and thinking of others, to love one another just as Jesus loved us. That is so important at the moment. We've got to remember many people that don't have their friends and neighbours close to them. So I find it very much a poignant part.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Anybody else? Yes, it's switched on this time. Yeah, I've done it right this time.
It struck me that in the second reading, one of the teachers of the law spoke wisely, and Jesus commended him. There was a real connection there between a group that we often think were opposed to Jesus, but a way through the conflict that he recognized the wisdom of the teacher of the law, and could feel that people around recognized that Jesus spoke wisely, and they didn't ask him any more questions. They give up tormenting.
Give up tormenting him. I like that. Yes, I like that. That's another paragraph. That's sorted. We're doing all right here. That's good to know, Richard. We've got the professionals out here this morning, you see. We've got the reader emeritus and retired readers, people who've studied.
I've always thought that the charge to love your neighbour as yourself is a bit of a challenge, because it makes you ask, in what ways do you love yourself? And how does that reflect on my neighbour?
After you. No, carry on. Yes, it is. Yes.
I think we could all reread the Gospel and just keep saying COP26 as we're reading it at the moment, because everything that is written in the Gospels you can take for today, and today that is the big priority.
Thank you. Okay. Well, that's good. I hadn't got that one. There we go. So there we go. So, Keith, is there a bin back there? You're all right. I'm really grateful for that, and I'm really grateful that people listen and people think and people are prepared to, and everybody else will have been listening and thinking, but not everybody likes to open their mouth. I know this. So thank you very much for that. There's a few things that struck me, and I'll share them with you. The funeral I did at the beginning of the week, it finished we went out to, at the request of the deceased, Lord of the Dance, in which, of course, one of the verses is, I dance for the scribe and the Pharisee, they wouldn't dance and they wouldn't follow me. And we tend to lump them all together, exactly, I think, as Angela said. You know, that here's one Pharisee who came, and he heard a wise discussion, and instead of rejecting it out of hand because it didn't fit what he already thought, he was interested in getting involved in this discussion. So he heard the debate, he heard how wise Jesus sounded, and he asked him the biggest and broadest question you could imagine. Of all the 10 commandments, and of all the tens of thousands of rules, and I'm speaking literally, that have been interpreted and heaped on top of them, which, teacher, is the greatest? And most of them, we lump them together quite rightly, because most of them would have come to him to use that sort of question to test him and try and trip him up. But here's a fella who really wants to know. And then it strikes me each time I read that Jesus cannot separate those two commandments. Love the Lord your God with all of yourself, basically. You can't love your neighbor. You can't love God without loving your neighbor. If our faith is just a religion, if it doesn't expand into works, as we've seen this morning, then it's not love. And I would argue as well that you can't love your neighbor without loving God. And I don't mean by that, please don't think I do, that only Christians can show love and compassion. I don't believe that for a moment. In fact, I'll tell you in a minute or two about somebody I've met this morning. Kath and Kate, two people I met at the funeral this week. Young women, I would guess in the late 20s, early 30s, and a couple. Kath has no Christian faith, but she works for FareShare. They're people who, for those of you who don't know, Barry is very involved in this. They take surplus food from supermarkets and what have you, and send them out to food banks and such like. This young lady with no faith in a God is nonetheless gobsmacked. And she told me, and she used that word, by the fact that 70% of all the food banks with which she is dealing are run by churches, above 70%. And she said that, that really speaks to her of faith in action. And that's how we show love. I don't believe that just because she hasn't yet got a faith. I always think of Michael King, who, when he used to say to me, there are two types of people in this world, Christians and not yet Christians. And I think that's a person on her journey. Love is more important, as Donald said, than all our sacrifices and burnt offerings. They're right back into the Old Testament there, and I can't quote you the chapter and verse, I wish I could, where God is saying to his people, you think I like the smell of the bulls and things while you're letting people starve? Really, really angry outbursts. Stop giving me your sacrifices and go and live the way I told you to, and love each other. So it's right back to the Old Testament. This gospel, Mark's gospel, is fairly compact, so it doesn't go into as much detail as the others. So there's, it goes on to say in Matthew, for example, on these two commandments hang all of the law and the prophets. In Luke, at a different place, the rich young ruler comes and asks the very pertinent question, who is my neighbor? And in front of everybody, including probably scribes and Pharisees, Jesus picked out the one class of person they would most hate as the person who is the neighbor, and there follows the Good Samaritan. They're outside of Jewish law, they're reviled. In other words, who is our neighbor? Everyone. It doesn't exclude anybody. And back to Kath and Kate. Kate, the other one, she does have a faith in God. But she's Welsh. When she goes back home to Wales, she can't go and worship in the chapels because she's in a same-sex relationship. And that's part of the reason why her partner doesn't have a faith. In Jesus' view, I believe nobody gets excluded. And in these globally connected times in which we live, I suggest that our neighbor can be in the next office or on the other side of the planet. It's huge. And as Rachel said this morning, the COP, everything we do here that harms the environment is going to affect somebody on the other side of the planet as well as close to home. I read this week, you can confidently assume that you've created God in your own image when God hates all the same people you do. In Matthew's version, where it says they hang all the law and the prophets, clearly, if we love God, we will follow his commandments. They're given us freedom, not as restrictions. They're given us the way to be healthy individuals and a healthy society and a healthy world. Clearly, if we love our neighbor as ourselves, we will want what's best for them. We won't murder them. We won't steal from them. We won't run off with their partners. We won't do anything that will do them harm. If we love our neighbors as ourselves, we will have ultimately a perfect society. I know it's hard. But everything hangs on love. And finally, the thing that always hits me on this is, as you love yourselves. Another of the young ladies that I was speaking to at the funeral, we're going to meet again over coffee because I want to spend some time listening to it, because she's lost three of her friends to suicide. And I think that we have a society that gears up to telling us we're not good enough, but we will be if we buy this product or adopt that lifestyle. And then there's the pressure and everything that goes with that. And it's something that I'm very, very keen to know more about. Because the message of God is exactly the polar opposite. God loves you infinitely. God loves each one of you as if there were no one else to love. Exactly as he made you. With whatever faults and foibles you've got, he wants you to be, to be working towards getting rid of the sin that you've got, but he loves you as you are. Not as the world loves, but as God loves, and that's how we must love. That's basically what I got out of there, and thank you very much for everybody else who helped out this morning. It was really good to hear other people's views.